I'm going to 2 Chronicles 24 in my Bible tonight. 2 Chronicles 24. We do have a new lesson at the back. Brother Doug, baby, if you don't mind, while you're back there, would you mind grabbing a few of those and maybe passing them down the aisles? If we can get a few of those out to who we can tonight, hopefully there'll be enough for us there together. But 2 Chronicles 24, and we're taking a look here together, week or lesson number 8, courage to build for the future. Courage to build for the future. And I think this will be good for us as we recognize with life's uncertainty, sometimes it's hard to build long term. And sometimes, I don't know if you ever feel like it, that sometimes it's like, well, I'm just trying to survive today, let alone looking down the road of tomorrow. And sometimes it takes risks, it takes planning, it takes a heart that is fastened on things beyond ourselves to be someone who is willing to have the courage to build for the future. So we're going to a young king by the name of Joash. And Joash was a king in the southern tribes of Israel. We'll talk about that in just a minute, what that means. But he was one that led a great change for his country and his people in trying to rebuild the temple that had fallen into disrepair. And the temple had been built underneath Solomon, but after Solomon, things had kind of started to fall apart. And so because of that, he really led a real charge towards trying to build the temple for the future of his people. And so we'll talk about the courage it takes to build for the future. So what I'm going to do is read this passage. It might take us a minute to get through it, but 2 Chronicles 24, and maybe we'll read all the verses 1 to verse 14. So you follow along as I read, then we'll pray and ask God to help us with this passage here together. It says, Joash was 7 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was also Zibiah of Beersheba. And Joash did that which was right in the sight of the Lord all the days of Jehoiada the priest. And Jehoiada took for him 2 wives, and he begat sons and daughters. And it came to pass after this that Joash was minded to repair the house of the Lord. And he gathered together the priests and the Levites, and said to them, Go out unto the cities of Judah, and gather of all Israel money to repair the house of your God from year to year, and see that ye hasten the matter. Howbeit the Levites hastened it not. And the king called for Jehoiada the chief, and said unto him, Why hast thou not required of the Levites to bring it out of Judah and out of Jerusalem the collection, according to the commandment of Moses, the servant of the Lord, and of the congregation of Israel, for the tabernacle of witness? For the sons of Athaliah, that wicked woman have broken up the house of God, and also all of the dedicated things of the house of the Lord did they bestow upon Balaam. And at the king's commandment they made a chest, and set it without at the gate of the house of the Lord. And they made a proclamation through Judah and Jerusalem to bring into the Lord the collection that Moses, the servant of God, laid upon Israel in the wilderness. And all the princes and all the people rejoiced, and brought in and cast into the chest until they had made an end. Now it came to pass that at what time the chest was brought into the king's office by the hand of the Levites, and when they saw that there was much money, the king's scribe and the high priest's officer came and emptied the chest, and took it, and carried it to its place again. Thus they did day by day, and gathered money in abundance. And the king and Jehoiada did it to such, gave it to such as did the work of the service of the house of the Lord, and hired masons and carpenters to repair the house of the Lord, and also such as wrought iron and brass to mend the house of the Lord. So the workmen wrought, and the work was perfected by them. And they set the house of God in his state, and strengthened it. And when they had finished it, they brought the rest of the money before the king and Jehoiada, whereof were made vessels for the house of the Lord, even vessels to minister, and to offer withal, and spoons and vessels of gold and silver. And they offered burnt offerings in the house of the Lord continually all the days of Jehoiada. Always a long passage. I want to understand it with you tonight, and I hope learn from it together. But let's pray and ask God to help us as we take this time together tonight. Father, I pray that you'd help us this evening to have courage to look to the future and see what you can do. And Lord, some people are built to be future-minded. Some of us struggle at times just to deal with the life in front of us. But Lord, it does take our hearts to dream and to build and to consider the work that you can do as we look to the future. I pray you'd help us tonight. Grow us, develop us, and change us, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. So, of course, you see a few characters here in this passage that'll help you understand the story and what's going on. The first one, of course, is that young king. A young king that, of course, begins, thank you, Mondo, a young king that begins his ministry at the ripe age of 7. What were you doing when you were 7 years old? Okay? I think of like Cherish, right? Cherish being queen of all the land, right? And obviously at that point in his rule, there's a lot of people around him that was supporting him. You see probably the key figure in that was a man by the name of Jehoiada. All right, and Jehoiada was who? He was the high priest. And so you can kind of see a big part, of course, of Joash, this young king growing up, was that back in his history, his grandmother was not a very nice woman. His grandmother decided that she was going to take power and kill off all of her son's children. And so she steps in, she tries to kill everyone, and Joash miraculously survives because he's hid by his aunt. And in that whole kind of process, he's hid, from what we can understand, at least in part in the temple. And so as he's growing up in hiding in the temple until he comes to the age of 7 years old. And at that point, Jehoiada kind of goes, the high priest is like, surprise! And brings out this young king, which of course turns the tide of everything. Athaliah, his grandmother, is killed. And at that moment, Joash becomes, yes, one of the youngest kings in the history of Israel. And much of what unfolds of his life, his actually 40-year reign, is very significant for Israel. And you think of how much a man who loved God and served God could make an impact. Now that's interesting because in much of what is happening, Israel at this point is in what we call the divided kingdom. Okay, so understanding the history of Israel, of course, Saul was the first king. Then after Saul, there was David, and then there was Solomon. Right? They were the only 3 kings in Israel's history that were kings over the combined kingdom. And then right after that, you have Rehoboam, and you have 10 tribes to the north and 2 tribes to the south that are a split kingdom. All right, there's basically numerous battles at times between the 2 of them, but there's a divided kingdom between Israel, which is called Israel, the 10 tribes in the north, and then the 2 tribes in the south. And a lot of Israel's history is told in the Old Testament. And you see stories both in 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles that really lay out a lot of different stories surrounding the kings. But to summarize, you have the basic problem that all the kings in the north of those 10 tribes, they were all bad kings, one after another, just rapid succession of almost like having bad government over and over and over and over again, and how far those things go. And then in the south, you kind of have a checkered history of sometimes there being good kings and sometimes there being bad kings. And in Israel's history, of course, the 10 tribes, first of all, are taken into captivity. Eventually, they're conquered by Assyria. And then years later, Babylon conquers the southern tribes. But in all of these different kind of histories of everything that happened, you have so much turmoil. You have so many kings that are sometimes killing different kings, people that are usurping or throwing out different authority. And sometimes you have people, sadly, with a desire for power and kind of a bloodthirsty direction that are willing to do anything they can to try and keep it. And Athaliah is one of those other characters in the story. This is this young king who we're talking about. This is his grandmother. And if you go to 2 Kings 11, if you can flip there quickly, might be in your notes there as well. But 2 Kings 11 verses 2 and 3, it kind of tells us the wickedness of what Athaliah did. 11:1 it says, and when Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, okay, this is Joash's dad, okay, this young king that we're talking about. When Athaliah saw that her son was dead, she arose and destroyed all the seed royal. I don't know what your grandmother was like, but man, that would be a rough grandma. All right, I'm just gonna kill everybody. Okay, she wanted power, sadly, at this point for herself. And so anyone that had a claim to the throne, she attempted to take their life. But then it says, verse 2, but Jehosheba, the daughter of King Joram, sister of Ahaziah, took Joash, the son of Ahaziah, and stole him away from the king's son, which were slain. And they hid him, even him and his nurse, in the bedchamber from Athaliah, so that he was not slain. And he was with her in the house of the Lord 6 years. And Athaliah did reign over the land. So from age 1 to age 7, where is this young king, Joash? He is hiding in the temple. And so it's really kind of a unique story as you see all of this unfolding. You see this young king step into the scene. What kind of man is he going to be? What kind of person? How is he going to operate? Is he going to be a bad king or a good king? Is he going to be wicked, or is he going to seek the Lord? And then you see that his life that unfolds is really focused so much on doing what God has for his life. And the reason I wanted to kind of lay that out just for a moment with you is because when this young man is planning for the future for his people, I want you to notice that he did not become determined by the checkered history that was really his infancy. And sometimes people look at the mistakes of others, sometimes look at the mistakes of their family, and they say, you know what, this has determined my future. This young man had a dad that passed away from what we can see relatively early. He had a grandmother that was an incredibly wicked woman. He had all of his family, all of his siblings, from what we can see, were all killed off young. This is not a great way to start a life, and then you're thrown into leadership at 7. How's this young man going to turn out? Most people would say, probably not well. He's probably going to be pretty damaged, and maybe in some ways he was. Maybe there's things that he personally struggled through. Maybe there's things he had to emotionally deal with like others would. But I want you to see, and I want you to understand that this young king did not allow his past and those who let him down and those who failed him determine all of his future. Here was a young king who, though throughout his reign was marked in many ways by obedience to God, although his start was incredibly difficult. And sometimes we go through struggles, sometimes we go through our own personal problems, and we think, hey, I could never think about doing something great or building something in the future because of our own checkered past. Let me ask you this, and hopefully we'll get a little bit further into this lesson. But what are some of the reasons, or what are some of the things that people go through that sometimes really stop them from planning or building a future? What are some of the reasons this might happen? Because here is this young king. Here he is in a life that has been checkered by difficulty, but he doesn't let it stop him. He doesn't let it end him. What are some of the things that sometimes people use as excuses or reasons as to why sometimes they can't see a future? Yes?
Being arrested as a teenager or young man.
Okay, criminal record. All right. Lots of people have them, more than you realize, right? And, people struggle through things and make sometimes bad choices, and they think, my life's over because of this. What else might cause people to be like, I could never do anything in the future. I could never accomplish anything. Yes? All right, mental disabilities. Sometimes people think either intellectually or emotionally. The history I come from, the things that I've struggled through, I couldn't do anything for the future, right? I think of this young man, I know a lot of the things he did was not when he was 7, all right? The Bible just marks that when his reign started. okay? But I think of a young man who's, basically like, my childhood was lost, right? I lost everything. Where was my childhood? Where was my dad? Where was my family? And of course, you didn't have them. Yes?
Sins of your lineage.
Sins of your lineage. Yeah, and that's good. And I think that's a big one that's happening here. This is who my dad was. For Joash, his dad was a wicked king, right? That was the history before him. His dad had not served God. His dad hadn't wanted God. His dad had been marked by being one of these kings with a checkered past. And that's who he's following. Yes, Franklin.
Being an orphan early in life. Being an orphan.
Oh, yeah, being an orphan.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And a lot of people that struggle through losing parents or sometimes great loss young, it's interesting. Sometimes it can really destroy the lives of some people, and sometimes it can really form the lives of some people. I look at, my dad passed away when I was 6, and I look back, and in some ways, although it was difficult, I do recognize how much it impacted and formed me as a person. And one of the things that God used, I believe, to bring me where I am today, although it was hard, right? But some of these things can end us, yes?
Just having negative people around you.
Okay, just having negative people around you. And it's interesting to me when you see this story. Yes, the wicked king was taken away, his dad. Yes, a wicked grandma was taken away, for sure. But who ends up being the big influence? A high priest. And I wonder if that influence changed the course of this young man's life. He was a big confidant and spokesperson in his life from very, very early on. And negative influences can be damaging, but thank God for good ones and those that influence us in the right way. Brother Doug, do you have a different one? Abuse. Yeah, sometimes the horrific things that people go through in their life. And obviously, most people don't talk through what they've personally dealt with and personally gone through. They do confide in some individuals, but then you find out sometimes how terrible a life some have experienced. And I know sometimes being a pastor, I realize how much I have to be thankful for. And although there's been difficult moments in my life, some of the things I haven't gone through in life. And so thank God for that. It's easy to think your life is hard until you start talking to other people whose lives have been much harder. And so here's a young man with a hard life. I think we'd all agree with that. A tough upbringing, right? Not an ideal situation. And a history that has already been marked by sin. And I would even say, I don't know about you, if this was me, I'd be pretty embarrassed. My life. I'd be like, this was my grandma, and this was my dad. And obviously, my grandma didn't want me, along with everybody else. And that'd be a pretty tough thing to process through. And I'm trying to bring this out because sometimes I think in our struggle for looking to the future as to what God can do, sometimes we really, really limit ourselves based on what has already happened. And here is a young man, here's a person that could have spent their whole childhood growing up saying, there's nothing really I am expected to do, nor is there anything I should do, because everyone behind me has already ruined everything for me. I mean, you think of being that king, how much would all the people that you're going to lead and serve remember your dad and your grandma? I mean, those are stories that do not vanish quickly. You know what I mean? Those are things that are not easily forgotten. I mean, they're etched in the Bible now for us forever. But Athaliah, whoa, what a woman she was, right? And you'd wonder, because we do this in time, we say, well, how much are you like your parents? We do inherit things from our parents. Sometimes even at times our emotional makeup. Sometimes there are things that we have a tendency to do because of what our parents have done. And they'd be like, yeah, you're good now, but one day you might be just like your dad. And how much some of those feelings and thoughts and murmurings could have potentially, been part of Joash's life. What I'm trying to bring out is when we try to start saying, hey, I want to do something for God in the future, and I'm going to take plans to do so, that is something that takes courage. Because I would say for every person in this room, there is always some wall that you are pushing against. There is always some pressure that makes that difficult. There's always a haunting pull that says, hey, your past is most likely going to define your future. And so being someone that with courage and ambition says, I want to do something different for the sake of God, the lesson we're looking at is that does take courage to not be dragged on by your past. And everyone has a past. Everyone struggles in different moments with their past. Every single one of us in this room has things in our past that we feel like pull us back and are negative impacts on our present life. The encouragement from Joash is he did not let that past define what he desired to do for God. And I think that's a great lesson for us because we don't want to allow our past to impact what God can do with our future desires, what God would want to change in your life, what God would want you to use you in your life. And we cannot allow ourselves to be someone who is pulled away from that courageous attitude. And so here is Joash. How does his reign start? It talks about the influence of Jehoiada. It talks about in verse number 2 that Joash did what was right in the sight of the Lord all the days of Jehoiada the priest. There's this great influence that he had. And I want you to notice verse number 4 because that's going to kind of form the direction of this chapter and lesson. And it says in verse number 4, and it came to pass after this that Joash was minded to repair the house of the Lord. All right, this became his ambition. This became his direction. He became a person that says, hey, I want to build something for God. I want to have a positive impact. Now, why is that? Because the temple that was built during Solomon's reign, right? We talked about these kings of the combined Israel. You had Saul, then David, then Solomon. Solomon is the last king. Underneath him, a massive temple is built that is really a symbol of the worship of God. But then during the succeeding years, during everything that happened afterwards, the temple falls into disrepair. So by the time that Joash comes on the scene, his grandmother has destroyed what the temple has been. Some of the elements of the temple that were used in temple worship have been moved over to worship Baal. Everything in that temple, from what we can see, is starting to crumble and just fall apart. It's like almost the building has just not been maintained or not been cared for, and so it's all crumbling at once. And Joash sees that, and he has a heart to say, you know what, I want to make a positive impact in the worship of God by seeing this temple and the worship of God restored. He's successful in it, strikingly successful. He stands in many ways against a wall of people, it seems initially, that don't seem to want to get on board. Yet, with holy determination, he pushes through and sees this project completed. So what we're going to basically ask in this lesson is, how was Joash able to have a courageous completion of this project? How was he able to plan for the future, desire to do something for God, and then see this project come across the line? The first thing is this, is he had a willing mind. He had a willing mind. And we see this in verse 4. We just read it. And it came to pass after this that Joash was minded to repair the house of the Lord. Okay, when you hear that word minded, what comes to your mind? Right? What does that word mean? We might not use that real often. I wouldn't say necessarily I was minded to do something. So what is the Bible talking about when it says you're minded to do something? You get the inference of that. Here is Joash. He is minded to repair the house of the Lord. All right.
Being told.
Pardon?
He's being told.
Okay, he's being told. He's got some pressure, from God on it. Yes?
Inspired.
Okay, inspired. All right. What else? Yeah, Brother Doug?
I can't remember the translation of that word to modern English, but
Sure.
my thought is that he was self-focused.
Okay. All right. Yeah, these are good to think through. Sarah? Okay, determined. And these are all part of it, right? It's talking about this driving internal pressure that's going to be like, hey, this is something I need to do. And I'm bringing that up because I'd like us to consider for just a moment, what are some of the things in life that sometimes we are minded to do? And what I mean by that is, hey, we feel like we have an internal pressure that's come from somewhere, something that needs to be accomplished. What are some of the things that sometimes we set as goals in our own personal life that sometimes absorb our mind and our thoughts? Besides something like this, what are some of the things that we deal with in our minds? All right, Michael?
People want to make money.
Okay, people want to make money. All right, I want to have a certain amount in the bank account by the end of the month. And to pay my bills, it's on my mind. Yes?
Graduate, get married, and have kids.
Okay. Graduate, get married, have kids. And sometimes people have their plan all minded out, right? Life just all thought out. What are you thinking, Boaz? Doing right. That's good. It's good to have on our mind to be like, I'm going to do the right thing, right? Yes?
Getting really good at your job.
Okay, getting really good at your job. And I think sometimes we want to have, whether it be the success or the respect or just the ability to accomplish something, can be something that we focus on. And maybe that's, I mean, we've talked a lot of different synonyms and all of them are good, but talking about here just the focus of one's mind and life on a certain objective. And a lot of people are task-oriented. Some people are not. Some people are aimless. All right? But most of us live with some goals, even if that goal is, I just want to get through today. But it does take courage to say there's something beyond today that I want to accomplish with my life. And my life might be hard. It might have been hard. But I have a focus that I want to accomplish something. And here's where his heart was. I don't want to let God's house get to the end of my reign and be looking like it is right now. I want to see God's house repaired. I want to see the worship of God restored. And I want to lead the charge in doing so. And that's what focused on his mind. And I'm saying that because sometimes we have so many other focuses that sometimes our life does not get God focus. And I'm not saying that you don't love God. I'm not saying that we might not focus on the things of God. I'm saying I think it's a wonderful thing that Joash had when he said, hey, this is what God has put on my heart that I want to accomplish with my life. And I have a holy ambition. I have a scriptural focus that, hey, there is something that I want to accomplish. And the reason I wanted to bring this out with you to consider this as a thing of courage is because being someone that sets goals in your life to do something for God does take courage for many reasons. One being with the moment you set a goal, you're setting up for yourselves the possibility to fail. Sometimes people are like, I don't want to set a goal. I might not be able to do it. Ever felt that way before? I met people like, I'm not making a New Year's resolution because I'm going to fail on January 2nd, right? And sometimes when it comes to even doing something for God, people are like, no, I don't want to commit to change. I don't want to commit to do something for the Lord. I don't want to commit to see someone come to Christ. I don't want to commit to change the way I handle my finances because I'm scared I might not do it, right? And sometimes for many, many reasons, we sit back idly without any holy determination and focus for the future of our life because it is easier to not have goals. It is easier to not have a point. It is easier sometimes just to go week after week, month after month, year after year, and feel like whatever I do is okay because I didn't necessarily have a focused goal with it anyway. And so I really do appreciate as we get Joash's life that at some point as he's developing into adulthood, as he's taking those steps, he's saying, hey, I have a goal that I want to do blank for the Lord. And for him, it was accomplishing something that it seems many people struggled with the idea of. You see in verse number 5, it says, and he gathered together the priests and the Levites and said to them, go out unto the cities of Judah and gather of all Israel money to repair the house of your God from year to year, and see that ye hasten the matter, howbeit the Levites hastened it not. So he sees this goal, he sees the Levites, and he says, Levites, I need you to go out, I need you to make sure that you do some fundraising, we need to get the money in here to get this job completed, and the Bible tells us what? They didn't hasten it. They didn't hurry. Now, let me ask you, okay, what do you think are some of the reasons that maybe the Levites did not hasten that job? Why do you think that they, for lack of better words, the Bible says they were told to do it, but they didn't do it? Why do you think the Levites might have done that? All right, Michael.
Inspired by the ideas Joash was.
Okay, they definitely were inspired. And that's kind of a funny thing when you see it. They're the Levites. All right, these are the guys, this is a job to care for the temple. The king's saying, hey, go do it. And they're like, seems a little strange. All right, they definitely weren't inspired, yes.
They didn't trust the last two rulers.
Okay, that's maybe a good point. Maybe they didn't trust the last two rulers. I think we've all had the feeling at different moments of leadership, and we're like, we'll see if you're here next year. We'll see how long your rule lasts. Why would we go and do this if, you don't make it, Who knows? Yes, Franklin.
The money to build the temple was supposed to come from the priest treasury. So if I was a priest, I wouldn't be rushing to spend the money.
That's right. And they had to get the money, and that would be part of course, what was coming into the temple. Be part of it, for sure. What else? Yes, Brother Doug.
They didn't have courage.
All right, they didn't have courage. I really wonder, as part of this, and I could be wrong, I mean, there's many, many different reasons. I really wonder if the Levites thought whether or not it could be done. I really wonder if they looked at the temple, looked at the task, looked at what was coming in the plate, like Franklin just mentioned, what people were giving, and it was just like, budget doesn't work, King. This is X amount of the cost, and this is X amount of the offerings. People aren't really interested. People aren't really worshiping. People aren't really showing up. This project just isn't going to work, which sometimes is the way life works. Yes, Tom?
If you're comfortable with what you've already got, it's hard to convince somebody to give some of that up for something that they can't even properly imagine.
Yeah, it's a wonderful consideration. We like comfort, and if life and the status quo is comfortable, why shake things up? Why mess with things? And maybe the Levites are doing just okay as it is, but hey, we don't want to rock the boat with the people. We don't want to go out there and start telling them that basically what is happening, hey, this is what Moses commanded as far as people's giving, and you guys aren't doing it. So hey, we need to get a part of this. The temple's broken down. Like, that's not a great job. Who wants to do that? Yes. Yes.
Does it say how old he was when the temple was completed? How many years he lived with the temple finished?
We can read through it. I haven't seen that yet. So maybe it's in there. I didn't notice it while I read. But yeah, I didn't see that on our way through. But it's interesting to wonder how many years he personally enjoyed it. But I think really, as you look at the story, most likely his focus was for the people that he led, but also for the people that would be coming after him, right? The people that he might not have even been part of. But it's good for us to recognize this and recognize the impact that someone has as far as what they can have in the ministry and the life of others. But he had a willing mind. The priests seem to really struggle through this. The project seems to be too big for them. Man, I have been going a long time and haven't got that far. Let me read this poem, and we'll see what we can do with the time that we have left. Somebody said that it couldn't be done, but with a chuckle replied that maybe it couldn't. But he would be one who wouldn't say so till he tried. So he buckled right in with a trace of a grin on his face. If he worried he'd hide it, he started to sing as he tackled the thing that couldn't be done, and he did it. There are thousands to tell you it cannot be done. There are thousands to prophesy failure. There are thousands to point out to you one by one the dangers that wait to assail you. But just buckle in with a bit of a grin. Just take off your coat and go to it. Just start in to sing and tackle the thing that cannot be done, and you'll do it. And this is the truth of Joash. It seemed to be so many that were putting on pressure to go a different direction, but he determined to focus forward on what God had for them. I'm going to give you one more line here in your notes if you have it there with you. What did he do as he had a willing mind? The first thing was he gave awareness. He gave awareness. And what I mean by that, and what we're trying to understand, is that he tried to point to others a need that was there that they did not recognize. One of the reasons the Levites might not have had a passion to get it accomplished is because they did not see it as a need the same way Joash saw it as a need. We'll pick up on that next week. I want to look at it with you together. But I do want you to recognize this. It takes courage to be the one to put the stake in the ground and say, I want to do something with my life for God. I want to do something, and this is what it is. I'm not going to be aimless. I'm going to have holy ambition. There might be others who don't think it needs to be done, but I believe with all my heart it needs to be done. So I want to leave a mark. I want to accomplish something. And once you do that, for lack of better words, you're putting yourself out there. You're taking risk. You're fearfully walking forward where sometimes others are unwilling to go. But don't live your life aimlessly. Don't be someone that just says, well, you don't know what I've been through. You don't know what I've struggled through. I can't accomplish anything. I can't do anything. My life has been so hard. That was Joash's life. He definitely was one who had his fair share and more of struggles. But he said, I want to do something. And this is what I want to do. And with God's help, he was able to accomplish it. This is this concept of courage. Courage to be someone that does not sit back. Courage to be someone who does not allow life to pass by. But courage to be someone who builds for the future.